Hello, and welcome to Myths, Mysteries, and More, Episode 3. This time, we're going to be talking about the Medea. So, last episode, I talked about the Bacchae, Euripides' greatest play, and also one of his last plays. Because for some reason, I thought it would be a wonderful idea to do it out of order. Because the Medea is one of his earliest plays in comparison, and I'm not going to talk too much this time about Euripides himself, because I already did that in the last episode. So you want to know all about Euripides, go listen to that episode that I did on the Bacchae. But I am going to bring up a couple points about Euripides, his mindset, and how that all plays into the Medea, because the Medea is, like the Bacchae, very much indicative of where Euripides is as a person. So, the Bacchae is written by old man Euripides, who is bitter and cynical, and views the world as being no more than the actions of gods and great men, and everybody else is just sort of being strung along and dragged along, and bad things happen to people, and there's really nothing you can do about it. It is Euripides having seen war and death and kind of ruminating on the forces and the pointlessness of it all. It is old man depressed Euripides. The Medea is not that Euripides. Medea is one of his earliest plays, and it is very indicative of a young, melodramatic Euripides. It is a Euripides who is concerned with young man things like high drama and high art, about deep passions, about injustices, about murder, and men being evil, and individuals doing things that they shouldn't. It is a Euripides that is focused on, like, court intrigue, and they're just, how do I put it? It's basically is Euripides viewing the world as though he was writing a daytime drama. So, the best way I can describe the Medea is that the interests that caused him to write it are the same that caused writers to turn around and write Law and Order SVU. That's basically this, like, the same passions and the same interests and the same sort of young person, like, curiosity with this kind of visceral, intimate story. That's where Euripides is at this moment when he's writing this play. So, having said all that, we need to talk about, unfortunately, the way in which this play has been interpreted by many, many, many writers. One of the things that's interesting to me is that the Bacchae as a story is much more complex in a lot of ways, but is relatively uninteresting to lots of people because it doesn't have any kind of, like, direct political or social vector to it. It's a religious play, it's a play on human nature, but because it's the way it is, a lot of philosophers and writers avoid it, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, they're not as interested in it and what it's saying. It's not like it easily fits into a narrative that lots of other people enjoy. It's not a play that lots of, like, psychologists and politicians and, like, social science people like to talk about, because it's, as a play, it's mostly, I guess you could say, cut and dry, but it's also very complex and contradictory in a lot of places, and it sums up where Euripides was as an old man when he wrote it. In contrast, the Medea has been talked about by basically everyone. It is in fact one of my like, it's almost an annoyance in some ways. Like, if the Bacchae is my favorite play by Euripides, the Medea might be my least favorite play by Euripides, just because everybody and their brother uses it as a way to, like, grind whatever axe they have in their hand at the moment. It is a play that has been morphed into so many different things and used as an example of so many different ideas by so many different actors that it almost loses all meaning. And here's a good example. Feminists grafted onto the Medea that it's a feminist work because it's all about a woman taking back power over a man who wronged her, and anti-feminists grafted onto it because they're like, see, this is why you can't, trust women on their own, because deep down they're murderous psychopaths. And it's like, if you have a work that is so fluid, I guess you could say, that anyone can make it into anything they want, it kind of loses its potence, because Euripides isn't doing anything that people like to say he's doing. People are trying to talk about the fact, oh, it's a feminist work, it's a non-feminist work, it's about racism, it's not about racism, it's about, politics and social status. No, it's not. Euripides is not making any huge statements. Euripides is not in that part of his life where he's interested in making that kind of thing. What Euripides is doing is he's writing a melodrama because he's a young playwright. He's looking to get noticed, basically, by the state, because if you're a playwright and you're good, then the state sponsors you. He's interested in writing about a myth that already existed, that being the myth of Jason and Medea, which has existed before this play did. And so Euripides does what he does with most of his myths, which is that he spins the mythology into a personal story. He takes the story of Jason and Medea and he turns it into a family drama. He turns it into a personal drama that his viewers can relate to. So if you try to graft onto it meaning that doesn't exist, and you can interpret it many ways, but you're almost certainly going to be attaching meaning that the playwright did not intend to attach to it, because at the time he was a young guy interested in melodrama and was attracted to the complexity of the story of, he wasn't really interested in making a point the way he's going to be in his later works. He's interested in depicting all of the various individuals and all their flaws. I will say that I have a personal reason to dislike this play, and it doesn't really have to do much with the play itself, but I do feel like I should say it, because I know that it's going to color my interpretation of this play and my analysis of it. So when I was in college, years and years ago, I had a professor who absolutely loved this play. It was his favorite Greek play. It was his favorite play of all time. It was he had put on performances of it. He constantly enthused about it to all of his students, myself included, and I absolutely could not see it. Okay, I have seen more versions of the Medea. I have seen the Medea performed in ancient Greek. I have seen the Medea performed using nothing, no words, but just using motions. I have seen the Medea in so many ways, and I just kind of hate this play. I'll be honest with you. It's not even that it's a bad play, it's just it bugs me because so much of this play has been distorted and twisted and reinterpreted so many ways that change it in the minds of everyone else. Because at the end, nobody really views the play, they view the interpretation of the play. And then they're interpreting the play through the interpretation, not through actually the play itself. It's a bit like Faust, where if you asked somebody, what is the story of Faust, they would give you an answer, but the answer would be wrong, because they've never seen or read Faust. The only way they know the story is through other people telling them an interpretation of the story. That's the way it is with the Medea, where most people who tell you or have any idea about the story have probably never read or seen the story. What they have read or seen is somebody else interpreting it or referencing it or talking about it in the context of some other issue. So I mentioned already feminism, I have mentioned racism, I have mentioned classism. This play gets drawn up and talked about in contexts all over the place, and has been for centuries. Like, there have been writers talking about this since the beginning of the Enlightenment. So we're talking hundreds of years of people interpreting this play, and most of them interpreting it through a different lens. That doesn't mean that the play is terrible. That doesn't even mean that the play is bad. It just means that it's kind of infuriating for me personally, because you're never engaging with anybody about the play. You engage with people about the interpretations of somebody else about the play, and that's not nearly as interesting to me. Now, that aside, let's talk about a little bit of backstory about the play itself, because the backstory is actually kind of interesting. So, originally, when this play was first performed, it was probably the closest we'll ever get to a real-life reenacting of the Frogs, which is the story of how Dionysus gets bored, and he grabs the three greatest playwrights and makes them compete against each other. In the story, he grabs Aeschylus. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. I need to figure out how you pronounce Aeschylus' name. Sophocles and Euripides. He grabs all three of them and makes them perform. In the first competition when this was performed, the people competing were Euripides, Sophocles, and the son of Aeschylus. So it wasn't Aeschylus himself, but it was his son. And his son won. Euripides also lost. So when he performed this play, Euripides lost because the Medea wasn't particularly interesting to audiences at the time. And that's not entirely surprising, because the play does not depict the Greeks in particularly good lights. It does not really portray Greek culture very well. It's skewering to a lot of individuals, and that would come to define Euripides, but you have to remember that this is just before the Peloponnesian War. Greek, I won't say nationalism, but like Greek pride was at an all-time high. And so a story about Euripides, like a story from Euripides talking about a less than great depiction of a Greek hero, was not particularly interesting. I will say that the story that he's telling is not the story that most ancient Greeks would have known. We have at least one other writer who makes a commentary on the Medea, specifically about how Euripides changed the story. And that's not entirely surprising. Euripides liked to do that. Euripides viewed himself as someone who was trying to tell a story more than trying to retell a story that already existed. All of that said, the story was in fact a great hit long term. There's lots and lots of archaeological data. There's pottery and there's pictures that are depicting specifically the Euripides version of the story. So in some ways, Euripides' version of Medea's story became the dominant version. And part of this is just because Euripides was very good at telling a story. I talked about this in the Bacchae a whole lot, but Euripides, as a person, really liked to focus on telling stories about human-like characters. Even when he was using gods, he wanted to make all of his stories personal. He wanted to talk about intimate, personal stories. And even when he's a young man, when he writes the Medea, this comes out. It just comes out very melodramatically. But because he's telling a very personal story, it resonates with lots of people, and that's also why it lasted as long as it did. Now, there's one last thing that we need to talk about, and it specifically revolves around the structure of the play. Now, some people who are only interested in the story and not plays specifically probably aren't going to find this very interesting, but it's important to note when you're talking about the play itself. So, in the Bacchae, it's written as a very complex story with a lot of characters. What's normally going on is there are 2 or more characters on set or on stage at any one time, plus a chorus, which is its own character, but the chorus is usually made up of like 10 to 20 people. The entirety of the Bacchae has lots and lots of people all interacting about lots of different things. It is like the characters are interacting with each other, the chorus is interacting with the characters are interacting with the chorus. There is a lot going on in the Bacchae. In contrast, the Medea is extremely simple. Okay, like most of the scenes in the Medea are like individuals or like 2 characters talking to each other. Okay, like there is, it gives a level of intimacy to the whole story because characters are left on their own. Okay, now there is a chorus in the story, but the chorus is much smaller, and that also adds to its more intimate nature. Because all of this is meant to be kind of like you're getting a window into the world of the individuals that are going through the play. You're kind of seeing their intimate personal life, and then the chorus is acting kind of like the responses of everyone around them. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, on that note, there's another thing that we need to talk about, which is that Medea is the character we're following through all of the story. And because Euripides is super interested in showing her personal story, he writes her in a way that most other writers of the time and since do not often write women, which is where we get into the whole like feminist thing. Because Medea is shown as being the smartest, most cunning, most ruthless character in the play. She is a character who is more than capable of manipulating everybody else around her. She is capable of seeing things that other people are not able to see. She is capable of making them do things that she wants them to do. But at the same time, she's equally capable of murdering her own kids in cold blood. Which is certainly different than normal in most plays. If you want to think back to Hercules. Hercules murders his family in a fit of madness. He is depicted as being essentially blameless for this crime, although he holds himself to as responsible, even though he is, by modern standards, entirely blameless in his family's death. It is unique, then, that Medea is shown to come to the logical, rational conclusion that she needs to murder her kids, and then goes about it without any excuse. Not only that, she owns up to it, and she is not punished for doing it. She gets away with it. In fact, she gets away with it and rubs it in the face of her husband that, yes, I murdered our children, and no, I don't regret it. Which is pretty unique, and it probably is why a lot of depictions of Medea have a girl boss vibe to them, because she's not ashamed of anything. Of anything she does. This is where a lot of feminists get their depiction of Medea being this strong, independent woman who doesn't need a man. Because on one hand, their version of the story is Medea is taken in by a man who she thinks she loves, and then finds out that actually she doesn't, finds out that the society that he has brought her into is extremely oppressive, and yet still manages to outwit all of them before taking her revenge and then riding off into the sunset. Anti-feminists, on the other hand, look at this and go, you can't civilize a monster, essentially, and Jason choosing to bring this woman into quote-unquote civilized society is wrong-headed and pointless, as she proves by then murdering her own kids. Now, obviously, neither of these is entirely correct. The former is perhaps more correct than the latter, but neither of them are particularly correct, because, again, Euripides is not interested in writing either of these things, because neither of these concepts existed to him. So it's somewhere in the middle between these two. So in some ways it is both extremely feminist and also extremely misogynistic. It is a bit of both, as much as a contradiction as we view that in modern times. I will say that Euripides, in my view, kind of looks at Medea not so much as a sympathetic or underdog figure, and more looks at her as someone who is forced to do something that is terrible because she views it as the right thing to do. I'm not sure if that makes a lot of sense, but essentially what they're trying to get at is that Medea is looking around her, and because she's written as being smarter than everyone else and more cunning than everyone else, she realizes that her kids are not going to have a very good life. She realizes that their father is not going to be particularly loving towards them. And so what she decides to do is essentially murder, well, she doesn't essentially murder, she actually murders them, under the view that them being dead is preferable to them living lives where they are looked down upon by everyone around them. And they don't depict this as being a good or bad idea, as much as they depict this as Medea believes this is the correct thing to do, and she believes that she has been wronged, and therefore it is perfectly acceptable to kill her children in order to save them from further wrongs. I mean, I guess you could kind of I guess in the future you would view Medea the same way you might view Sephiroth, in that the killing you is a kindness because leaving you alive would be cruelty. Because if you're alive, you have to suffer, and if you're dead, you don't suffer. So clearly that means killing you is a better choice than leaving you alive, even though the reason that she's really doing it is also because she wants to get revenge on her husband. And depending on who you talk to and depending on how you read it, you can view this either as she cares for her children, that's why she's killing them, or she hates her husband more than she loves her children, that's why she's killing them. So either way, one of those two is correct. You can decide which you think is the right one. So now that we've talked about all of that, let's get into the story itself. What is the story? How does it go? What is happening? Now, depending on what version you're watching, listening to, or reading, the story either begins before when Jason is questing for the Golden Fleece, or it just jumps into the story. For the sake of completion, I guess you could say, for the sake of understanding the story, I'm going to explain something that the original play does not. Because the original play begins the story with Medea already being wronged, because it kind of jumps in the middle of things, okay? The original play is all about Medea, and everything is kind of told in flashback almost, where she talks to the audience about what's been done to her. Various interpretations have instead shown the actual journey of Jason, his meeting of Medea, and kind of give it purpose, and this is both good and bad, because just seeing Medea being angry and telling you, you only get her position. Euripides very much wants you to understand Medea's position on all of this, and for the audience not to know if she's being completely honest or not. Euripides is smart enough to know that if he showed the story of the Golden Fleece beforehand, the audience would have the opportunity to interpret her words and actions being true or not based around how they interpret how she acts around Jason. Whereas if you start with just Medea and her being angry, it only gives the audience her perspective on everything. And that means that you're better able to understand the core of this play, which is Medea's anger. Having said that, I am not sure how many people are actually familiar with the story that all the ancient Greeks would know, which is the story of the Golden Fleece, so I will boil it down now for you. Jason and his Argonauts are Greek adventurers looking for things as Greek adventurers do. He is one of many great, I guess you could say, heroes of the Greek pantheon. He is looking to make his name in the world, and to that end, he seeks the Golden Fleece, which is a golden sheep's hide that is invulnerable to any wound. That's what it is. It is golden wool, essentially. He also wants to do this because he understands that if he does this, he will be able to go back to his home city of Corinth, which is another city-state in Greece, and become king. Because obviously, to be a great king, you need to first be a great adventurer. That's just the nature of Greek. That's just the nature of the Greeks, essentially. Anyway, to do this, to get the Golden Fleece, he's going to need help. Because despite the fact that he and his Argonauts are great warriors, they find the fleece has already been obtained by a different people. Now, depending on what version of the story you get will depend on where the fleece is. Some people say it is in what is today the Crimea. Other people say it's in Asia Minor, which is today Turkey. It is somewhere in the east where there are quote-unquote barbarian tribes who already possess the Golden Fleece. Now, Jason, upon arriving and seeing the Golden Fleece, realizes that he doesn't really have a chance of killing the king and all of his warriors and then escaping, because if he tries to take it by force, they will kill all of them and they will lose. So he tries to barter with the king. The king refuses. He's not going to give up the Golden Fleece. It's his. He's certainly not going to give it up to a random Greek guy who demands it. So Jason goes with plan B, which is he seduces the daughter of the quote-unquote barbarian king, who is Medea, promises to marry her and take her back to Greece. Medea is infatuated with this king, or guy who claims he's going to be king, because he's exotic and different and dashing, because he's young and powerful. And she's like, okay, I will steal the fleece with you, we'll escape in the night, and after doing this, we will go back to your home city, I will be queen, and everything will be good. So she steals the fleece, they run off on his boat, they sail back to Corinth, and that is where our play ostensibly begins. Well, no, that's not true. We have a little bit more before this, but it's kind of revealed, essentially, how do I put this? It's kind of revealed in the play, but I'll kind of set the stage anyway. Essentially what happens as soon as Medea gets back is that King Creon, who is currently king and has no sons, decides that, yes, he wants Jason to be king. He's a great enough hero, he will do good. But the problem is that in order to do this, he needs to marry into King Creon's family. As you can imagine, this is kind of a problem because he's supposed to be already getting married to Medea. So Jason has a choice to make. Does he marry Medea, the woman he promised to marry in exchange for the Golden Fleece, or does he marry King Creon's daughter along with what Creon wants so that he can be king? Is his word more powerful than his lust for power, essentially? Now, if anyone who has ever read the story of the Minotaur and of Ariadne and Dionysus, you will know that Greek heroes essentially never follow through on their agreement to marry people. If they say they're going to marry you in exchange for help doing their great hero thing, chances are they are going to dump you over the side of the boat as soon as they can. In fact, the only one who never does this is Perseus, which is why Perseus is the greatest hero in Greek mythology, or at least the most moral. I would say that the scale of morality in Greek heroes is, on one side, you have Perseus, who is a great guy who saves Andromeda, marries her, and is basically a good, moral, upstanding dude at every opportunity. And on the opposite side of the scale, you have Theseus, who is a giant dude bro douche, who lies to the woman who helps him survive the Minotaur, who doesn't pay any attention to changing the sails so that his father dies, and also dumps his wife-to-be over the side of the boat halfway through when he realizes he might actually have to follow through on his promise. Jason is closer to Theseus than he is Perseus, okay? Because Jason also lies to Medea about marrying her and agreeing to make her his equal, and all that fun stuff, because as soon as Creon is like, hey, okay, you can be king, but you need to marry my daughter to do it, Jason is like, wonderful! Screw Medea and screw the kids I've had with her, I'm gonna shack up with your daughter and forget my wife and kids, because power is great, and that's what I want. So therefore, we begin with Medea having been told that her husband is basically, or her husband-to-be, is basically going to screw her over. Well, screw her over and her kids over. As you can imagine, she is beside herself and distraught with grief and really also rage, as you can probably imagine. Now again, as I said, Euripides is very much making this a melodrama. It's a personal story. A lot is focused on the fact that Medea is split between her sadness at being heartbroken and betrayed and her being royally pissed off about the whole thing. This is a story that has been retold many times since, and is the subject of many, many, many stories throughout history. In fact, you've probably watched many movies where a woman is wronged and she decides to exact extreme amounts of vengeance upon her husband. And this is example A. Now, I should point out that because this is a story focused around Medea, everything and everyone sort of revolves around her and her actions. So, for example, despite the fact that we begin the play with Medea expressing all of these emotions, we also see someone nearby, in particular, the nurse that's supposed to be taking care of her kids. And the reason for this is that this character, which isn't really named, is meant to convey to the audience that everybody else in the court, everybody else around Medea, is already worried about what she's going to do. Now, it's not clear what the reason for this is, and you can assign many different interpretations of why they think this. It could be racism, where a bunch of Greeks think this barbarian woman is unstable. It could be sexism, where they think a woman scorned can do terrible things. You can read into it however you like. I'm mentioning it because it's there to establish that everybody already assumes that if they go through with all of this, if Jason marries another woman, that Medea is going to do horrible things, either to herself, or to her kids, or to Jason, or to everyone involved. Now, having said that, we need to talk about Creon. Now, I mentioned him earlier. Creon, obviously, is the king, and Creon now shows up in the play. It should be noted that Creon is somehow not a moron, because he realizes that Medea is going to be super pissed off and angry and probably do something horrible. However, Creon is a moron because he decides to go right up to Medea and basically say, I'm kicking you out. Because you see, Creon has realized that his daughter's going to marry Jason, and he has to do something about Jason's wife and kids. And he realizes that Medea is angry and possibly violent, and who knows what she might do. So Creon decides that the only way to solve this problem, the only way to square this circle, is to exile Medea, because if she's not in the city, then she can't do anything violent or murderous or hurt anybody, theoretically. Now, it is worth noting that Creon apparently decided to do this directly, so I guess he has a lot of courage, because he just kind of goes up to Medea personally and says, hey, I'm kicking you out of the city. Now, Medea immediately begins to plead for delay, because she's like, hey, I've lived here for a while, I have kids here, don't kick me out today. I need another day to pack everything up, and then I'll leave. And Creon is like, I didn't think she would agree to that. Okay, I'll give you a day. So he's smart enough to realize that he needs to get rid of Medea, but he's not smart enough to realize that she's obviously playing him. Creon, however, is smarter than Jason. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's a scale of, jerkishness when it comes to Greek heroes that goes from Perseus on one side of being, always morally good and always doing the right thing, and Theseus on the other of always doing the wrong thing, and how Jason is very close to it. This is the scene in the play that explains and reveals to the audience exactly what kind of jerk he is. So this is Jason's big scene. This is the scene where Jason reveals his motivations and his plans and everything else. This is Jason essentially talking to the audience and being like, here's why I did it. You could interpret this as the villain scene in every movie where the villain lays out his plans and his motivations. This is the scene where Lex Luthor talks to Superman, where he's like, this was my grand plan. And it really does come off this way because Jason's reasons are, on their face, extremely unlikable. Intentionally so. So you see, Jason is like, okay, I couldn't really not marry a princess because I want to be a king. And the only way to be a king is either to take a city or marry a princess. And the opportunity was there, so I would be a fool to take it. Besides, Medea is a barbarian, so she's not a Greek, so she's not nearly as good. She doesn't matter as much. And you might think, okay, that's kind of a jerk move, but you could kind of understand the logic of, a super ambitious person discarding one wife for another. You could sort of understand that logic. But then Jason goes even further, because he's even more of a jerk, and he's like, so my plan is to not discard my wife, but to make her my mistress. So I'll have princess wife, who will one day be queen, so I can be king, and then I'll have Medea, my first wife, as my mistress, and everybody will be a wonderful, happy family. That is Jason's plan. As you can see, or probably realize, Jason is a moron. Jason is mind-meltingly stupid, which is kind of par for the course when it comes to Greek heroes. Aside from, Odysseus, most Greek heroes are idiots. Especially when you get further on the scale that I mentioned. the closer to Theseus you get, the stupider your hero probably is. It should be pointed now that Medea, as well as a bunch of other people, now get to offer retorts, and they basically boil down to, you're full of shit, Jason, and everybody else is sacrificed for you, and you're just kind of screwing me over. Like, Medea is like, I left my family for you, I left my country for you, I left my kingdom for you. I am also a princess. I'm not a Greek princess, but I am a Greek princess. My father was going to kill you, and I saved your life, and you're just going to throw me out in the cold or leave me as your second wife because a better one has come into your life? Are you serious? Like, are you for real? Is this really what you're going to do? Jason then goes and makes it even worse, and I know what you're probably thinking, how on earth could you possibly make it worse? Well, Jason is like, okay, look, after I get married and I become a prince, I will support you and the children. I will pay child support and support you by giving you lots of money as you all leave the city and never come back. I will totally pay for you to do that so you can stop bothering me. Medea takes it well, by which I mean that she gets royally pissed off and essentially swears vengeance, which is something I think we can all understand, because her husband has basically said, I'm going to pay for you and the kids to never come back, and I'm going to find a new wife that's better than you, that will give me more status now that I have no more use for you or the kids. So yeah, Medea is just like, I'm just going to swear vengeance, and you're gonna rue the day you crossed me, essentially. At this point in the play, a new figure now enters, which means I have to give more backstory. I'm sorry, Euripides likes to tie in lots and lots of mythological figures from lots and lots of different myths. So now enters King Aegis. Now you may have heard of this name before. If you heard of the Aegean Sea, namely the sea around Greece, that bears his name, you've probably heard of this figure. I've also mentioned Theseus. He's the father of Theseus. He's also the king of Athens, because all of this stuff sort of happens around the same time, and so mythological figures just kind of wander in and out of various myths, despite the fact that the timeline is all messed up. That's not important, though. The point is, King Aegis, king of Athens, has now entered the plot. Okay? And it's not really clear why he enters the plot and just decides to start talking to Medea, but he does. And like any good figure who has just entered the play for the sole purpose of moving the plot forward, he gives us exposition. Namely, he tells everybody that, I got married, I don't have kids, and that sucks. Also, I went to the Oracle, and it was like, hey, tell me my future. And the Oracle's like, whatever you do, don't unstop a wineskin's neck. And Aegis is like, what on earth does that mean? And the Oracle's just kind of like, question unclear, ask again later. So Aegis leaves, or Aegis, I don't really know how to pronounce his name. Doesn't really matter. He doesn't spend much time in the plot, so you really only need to know because he's there to facilitate moving the plot forward. So he is completely unaware of the situation. He has no idea what's going on. He's just kind of there because there's supposed to be a wedding, and when you're a king of city-state, you show up at everybody else's, all the other weddings at all the other city-states. It's like 5 miles away or something, I don't know. Again, the times and distances are all weird. I assume it's like the Assassin's Creed universe where everything is just like a cutscene away. Doesn't matter. Anyway, Medea is just kind of like, look, I'm being thrown out as the old wife, and so are my kids, and I don't have a place to live, and I'm going to be homeless, and the kids are going to be homeless. Woe is me. I don't know what I'm going to do. Will you please let me stay in Athens? And Aegis is kind of like, I don't know. I mean, that might put me in a bad spot with the current king. I don't know if I can really let you stay. And Medea's like, well, I'm a barbarian, and I'm also magic, and I can totally help you have children. So if you let me stay in Athens, I will give you the ability to have kids. And Aegis is like, deal. Absolutely, I will totally let you stay in Athens. Now, it is worth noting that he is completely unaware of the fact that Medea's whole plan is to murder everyone. And when I say murder everyone, I mean everyone. Medea's plan is not simply just to murder her kids. That's what everyone knows. Like, when you think of the play, most people are like, yeah, Medea murders her kids. Medea's plan is not just to do that. Medea's plan is to murder them. It's to murder King Creon. It's to murder Jason's wife, Glaus. Like, her plan is just to, like, kill everyone that she can and burn the place to the ground. Not unreasonably, although I kind of wonder if it's really Creon and Glaus's fault that Jason has decided to do this. But I guess Medea just assumes that because they're also throwing her out, they need to suffer too. So, she concocts a wicked scheme, which at this point gets a little bit complex, so again, we kind of have to talk about backstory and lineages. You see, Medea is related to the sun god Helios. Now, yes, she's a barbarian, but somehow, through her family line, she is related to Helios. I also know him as the god of the sun before Apollo becomes god of the sun in Greek mythology. It's weird. Don't worry about that. It's not important right now. In any case, Medea realizes that the best plan that she can hope for is to poison something given to her by Helios, particularly a family heirloom, in this case, golden robes, because she realizes that Glaus and Creon are vain, and particularly Glaus, and she will put the golden robes on, and if they're poisoned, she will immediately die. And so that's how she plans to murder her. She's going to take this golden robe and give it to Glaus, and she will wear it and die. That is a straightforward plan, as you can probably get. There's just one small problem. She realizes that no one is going to trust a gift that she gives them, because who would trust the gift of an avowed witch who is currently being exiled because she's the wife that the husband-to-be doesn't want anymore? It's at this point that Medea essentially resolves to murder her children, because this keeps coming up. Now, she acknowledges that the kids have not done anything wrong, that they are innocents in all of this family drama. They have not done anything to warrant being murdered. However, Medea has a couple reasons for doing this, for going through with her act of, killing her children. The first is that she realizes that her kids are never going to live happy lives because they are, the sons of a discarded wife, which means that if Jason has more kids, they will be disinherited. But the bigger problem is that they are the kids of a barbarian woman, which means they're not fully Greek, which means they're not ever going to be treated as full people in Greek society. They are outsiders, and they will never be treated as equals. However, the main reason that Medea does this is that she realizes that murdering her children is the biggest way to hurt Jason. She is consumed with such hatred of her husband that she wants to murder everything in his life, everything that will bring him happiness. She wants to kill every little bit of joy that's in his life. She wants to take everything from him. She's going to kill his father-in-law, who's going to make him a king. She's going to kill his bride-to-be, who's going to make him a prince. She's going to kill his male heirs. She's going to put him through hell because he deserves it. And so now the plot begins. The first step of which is that she calls Jason back to her because she wants to apologize. You see, she was acting overly emotional earlier. Really, Jason's offer to her is extremely generous. I mean, he's going to support her and the kids. I mean, sure, they're not going to live with him and they're going to be disinherited and stuff, but, just the fact that, he's going to support them is really generous. And honestly, the heart wants what the heart wants, and, she can't really hold it all against him. And so, really, she's regretting how all the things she said to him. She regrets that she cursed him, and she's really sorry. And as a show of kindness and how much she's changed, she wants her sons to give gifts to the new wife and father-in-law. Because you see, she's hoping that if her sons give gifts to Creon and Glaus, that they will not throw her sons out. Sure, they're going to throw her out still. She knows there's no hope of staying herself, but her kids are innocent in all this. So, they should be allowed to, give gifts to the new happy couple, the new happy mother that they're going to have and father-in-law, and they could be a big happy family. And Jason, being as dumb as a bag of rocks, agrees to all of this. And it is here where the murdering begins, because you see, we essentially jump cut from Medea begging Jason to allow her kids to bring gifts to the news that both Glaus and Creon are dead. Because you see, the children brought the golden robes, they put them on, and they died horribly. And it's described as them dying excruciating deaths. They did not die like painless deaths at all. This was some Joker toxin stuff. Okay, Medea is turned into a supervillain, and she has essentially poisoned them both so that they die in twisted agony, screaming horribly as the life is choked out of them via the robes that they put on. Now, I'm not exactly sure how her sons didn't manage to also die, given the fact that they gave the robes to Glaus, who then died of them from touching them, but that's not really important because they're not going to be alive much longer anyway. Medea, you see, is fully on board now with the project of ruining Jason's life. She's murdered the princess who's going to make him a prince. She's murdered the father-in-law that's going to make him a king. She's essentially going to murder everything and everyone that will ever bring him happiness, and that includes his two male heirs. It's worth noting that Medea mentions that this will also hurt her because, again, they're her sons. She bore them. However, hurting Jason takes precedence over any sadness that she will feel. Because you see, Jason has ruined everything. He has dishonored her, he's dishonored himself, he's dishonored his kids, he's dishonored his cow. Everything must die. Medea, sad as she may be to stab her children to death, will take heart knowing that it's going to hurt Jason a whole lot more than it's going to hurt her. It's at this point that Jason re-enters the scene. Because you see, he's kind of suspicious about the fact that the gifts that their kids brought his wife-to-be and father-in-law poisoned them and murdered them. And he's pretty certain that Medea did it, and that she has something to do with this. So he's come to confront her, to ask her, did you have something to do with them dying horribly of poison that came from the gifts that you had our kids bring them? And when he comes to come ask her, he immediately hears the screams of his children being murdered, because Medea has decided that right then is the time to murder them. It's at this point that the play gets kind of preachy, because you see, Medea sort of transitions from being a mortal figure and the play being about her acting as a mortal woman and sort of moves to her being a slightly divine figure and her being an agent of divine vengeance. Because at this point in the play, she reveals herself riding Helios's chariot. Now, for those of you who know more about Greek mythology, you'll know that the sun moving across the sky is Helios riding in his chariot across the sky every day. So Medea is now in the chariot above Jason with the dead bodies of her kids in the chariot with her. And she's like, Helios gave me this chariot. The gods approve of me murdering my kids to spite you. Also, I'm going to take the kids with me and bury them somewhere else so you can't have them. It's unclear why exactly she still needed to murder her kids if she was going to take them with her anyway, but again, it kind of circles back to murdering her kids will hurt Jason, and that is all that matters to her at this moment. And it's at this point that Medea essentially becomes a god, because if you think back to my last episode on the Bacchae, and you remember that the entire play is about the fact that Dionysus has been treated poorly. He was mocked by Pentheus. He was treated with disrespect by the people of Thebes. And so as a result, he takes revenge on them. Medea is essentially acting in the same role that Dionysus acted there, where she is exacting divine vengeance upon Jason. She has murdered his children, she has murdered his wife-to-be, she has murdered his father-in-law-to-be, and she is now presented as a semi-divine figure riding in the chariot of Helios. She is revealed as an instrument of divine will, essentially. And that's a thing that Euripides does a lot. Again, this is in the Bacchae later, which I talked about last episode. But this is also, in a way, trying to justify her actions. So obviously, morality-wise, it's pretty bad to be murdering your children and murdering other people. Like, that's a very bad thing to do. In fact, there are other plays about why murder is wrong, and at some point we will get to them. However, for now, she's being presented as someone who has, at the very least, divine sanction to do all of this, which means that it's all okay. Which means she's not in the wrong here, because the gods are like, yeah, you were given a raw deal, and you are completely justified in murdering your children and murdering these other people. And it's at this point that the chorus continues, because if we were doing a modern depiction of this, this would probably be the point where it ends. It would probably be the moment where Medea rides off into the sunset, and we're kind of left with ourselves. But because it's a play, because it's an ancient Greek play, the play needs to explain to the audience the moral of the story. And the moral, ostensibly, is that you don't want to piss off the gods and act dishonorably for your own gain, because the gods will punish you if you do things like that. You might not expect it. You might never, anticipate it. But if you do things that the gods dislike, if you act in a manner that benefits you but is dishonorable or impious, then you can only expect bad things to happen to you as a result. And that is, for better or worse, the Medea. That is the whole story, and that is where our play ends. Now, there's not much else to say, but I think there's a few things that I can comment on before we end. So the first thing I want to mention is that, as far as we know, Euripides might have changed the story when he put on the play. Now, this is not entirely surprising, because again, at this point, most of the traditions involving Greek mythology were oral, and so people changed the story all the time. It was not odd at all for people to make up new versions of old stories. So the Medea was already a story that people knew. That said, as far as we can tell, the part about her murdering her children was something Euripides invented. Although that's not something that is entirely certain because we have other sources, and depending on which one you think is older, depends on whether or not you think he did it. What we do know is that at this point in time, around the time this play was invented, the tradition of her murdering her kids essentially became the new canon. So, even if it wasn't beforehand, people seem to like the version where she murders her children. And it's probably why the whole murder of her kids thing doesn't make a whole lot of sense after she's already murdered Jason's wife-to-be and his father-in-law. Because at that point, she's already taken her vengeance, and killing her kids doesn't really accomplish much else, but because Euripides really liked melodrama at this part of his career, he included it, as far as we can tell. And turns out a whole lot of other people really liked that version, because it's stuck with it ever since. So, yay for filicide, I guess? I don't really know. And with that, we're done. That's the Medea, that's all there is to it. I don't really know what I'm going to do next time. I think I'm going to get away from ancient Greek mythology. Haven't really decided what I'm going to do yet, but I definitely don't want to do yet another ancient Greek play. I will do other ancient Greek plays, obviously, but for now, I think that since I've done 2 already, and I've done Hesiod's Theogony, I'm going to get away from that and do something else. So, stay tuned for that. See y'all next time.